You know that moment in a story when a character's emotions just spill over?
Oh, yeah.
They break down, they rage, weep. Sometimes it hits you hard, you really feel it.
And other times,
And other times it just kind of clunks, right? Falls flat.
it's certainly noticeable when an emotional climax doesn't quite land.
Yeah,
You're sort of left wondering, why didn't that work for me?
exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. We're looking at a specific instance of this.
Okay.
Sasuke Uchiha's emotional reaction after a really, really traumatic event. We'll be looking at how this huge moment is shown in the original Naruto manga versus the anime filler.
Oh, right. That's a really interesting contrast, isn't it? Seeing two different takes on the same, crucial character beat.
Yeah. Now, you listening, you might already have a strong feeling about one version or the other. Maybe one really, worked for you.
Sure.
Our goal here isn't really to say one is definitively better or anything.
No, it's more complex than that.
It is. Instead, we want to explore the psychological stuff underneath Sasuke's reaction in both versions. It's a chance to maybe get a deeper understanding of how trauma can show up.
And how storytelling can, either really capture those nuances well or kind of miss the mark.
Exactly.
So we've looked at online discussions, fan debates, comparing these scenes, and we're also bringing in some psychological perspectives on trauma responses.
Right.
The aim is to sort of unpack which version feels maybe more authentic, especially when you look at it through that trauma-informed lens.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Starting with the manga. How does the manga handle it?
Okay, so manga Sasuke, he's in the hospital. Just gone through that incredibly intense, awful experience with his brother.
Right, the big reveal and the fight aftermath.
Exactly. So he's isolated, he's recovering physically, emotionally. Then pretty suddenly, actually, boom, this huge outburst on the rooftop when he sees Naruto.
Yeah, it feels quite abrupt in the manga.
It does. And the argument you often hear supporting the manga's way is that this suddenness, it actually feels, well, real, like a delayed reaction.
Okay. Delayed how?
Like a delayed reaction to that severe trauma. The psychological impact, the physical pain, it's been building up inside him. Some discussions pointed out he's been sort of stewing in that pain.
Okay, I can see that. Like it's all bottled up.
Yeah, all that unprocessed stuff, the trauma, the frustration, maybe helplessness, just builds and builds and then erupts outwards.
So it's not necessarily a logical, A causes B reaction in that specific moment.
Not perfectly logical, no. It's more like raw emotion finally breaking through the dam.
Okay. Now, what about the Rasengan? Because there's some talk about that. He doesn't actually see Naruto use it right then in the manga, does he?
That's a fair point, he doesn't. And some people have argued, well, without that visual trigger, does the outburst make as much sense?
Right. Does it feel a bit unprompted?
Yeah, or maybe. From a story perspective, is it a bit unrealistic he would know anything about Naruto getting stronger if they hadn't interacted? It raises some questions about, narrative flow, maybe.
That's true, the lack of interaction detail. But even without seeing the Rasengan right then, the core argument for the manga is still that built-up trauma, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The focus stays on that internal pressure cooker, that delayed reaction finally hitting. Less about one single trigger, more about the overall state he's in.
Okay, so let's flip to the filler then. How does that version show this period? It's quite different.
Oh, very different. In the filler, you see Sasuke seemingly recovered, physically at least.
Yeah, he's up and about.
He's interacting with Team 7. He seems relatively social, active. And this goes on for, several weeks before the big emotional outburst.
Right, weeks. That's the key difference.
It is.
Yeah.
And this is where the interpretation really splits. The critique of the filler often is that this long period of him seeming okay.
Normal, almost.
Yeah, normal-ish.
Yeah.
It makes his eventual reaction feel less like a trauma response. It feels more like, well, the sources often use terms like petty jealousy or even like a premeditated resentment building up because Naruto's catching up or getting stronger.
Yeah, that totally changes the flavor of it, doesn't it? Instead of this deep internal wound bursting open.
It feels more like
a rivalry thing. Maybe even a bit childish, like, hey, he's getting stronger than me, I'm mad.
Precisely. It can simplify the character, as some sources argue.
How so?
Well, he shifts from this really complex kid dealing with immense psychological pain to something maybe closer to a standard antagonist, motivated by envy, basically.
Okay, so manga's internal buildup, filler's external jealousy trigger after weeks of seeming okay. Let's bring in the psychology now. How does this map onto what we know about trauma responses?
Right. Well, what's really interesting is how The manga's version, the suddenness,
Mm-hmm.
it actually lines up pretty well with known responses to acute trauma. Think about it. Sasuke goes through this horrific event, and an immediate reaction can often be withdrawal, numbness, what's sometimes called the freeze response.
Freeze response, like tonic immobility, or just being emotionally shut down.
Exactly. Could be either or both. It's like your system gets overloaded and just pauses, dissociates maybe. It's a protective thing initially.
That makes sense, a coping mechanism.
Right. And many people who go through something terrible don't have a huge outward emotional explosion right away. There could be a significant delay.
So the intense stuff comes later.
Often, yeah. Intense emotions can resurface, sometimes triggered by something that seems kind of minor, on the surface anyway.
Ah, okay. And that's where Naruto's progress comes in, even if Sasuke doesn't see the Rasengan right then in the manga.
Potentially, yes. That could be the trigger. Even just the idea of Naruto getting stronger could act as a potent, maybe subconscious trauma trigger.
Because a trigger isn't always directly related, it just reminds you somehow.
Exactly. It taps into those feelings from the trauma. So for Sasuke, Naruto getting stronger could remind him of his own perceived failure, his weakness, the fact his revenge seems further away. It's not just simple jealousy.
It's tapping into that deeper well of trauma.
It could be, yeah, triggering a kind of trauma-based spiral. He's succeeding, so I'm failing, so my whole world is collapsing again, leading to rage, despair.
Wow, okay. And the isolation, he's alone in the hospital in the manga, that matters too, right?
Oh, hugely.
Yeah.
Isolation after trauma is, well, it's generally not good for emotional regulation.
Makes things worse.
Often, yes. It gives you too much time to ruminate. It can amplify that internal pressure, make emotional outbursts more likely. So the manga, where the breakdown seems to come after that period of stewing alone, that fits psychologically.
Okay, now compare that to the filler. You mentioned functional freeze. Let's talk about that.
Right. So functional freeze is this idea where someone's gone through trauma, but on the outside, they seem to be coping okay.
Like the filler Sasuke, going on missions, talking to people.
Potentially, yeah. They're functioning, doing tasks, interacting, but internally, the trauma hasn't actually been processed. It's still there, under the surface.
Okay. So what's the issue with the filler portrayal, then, from this view?
Well, if someone is in that functional freeze state, you might not expect a relatively smaller trigger, like seeing Naruto's progress after weeks of seeming fine, to cause such a sudden, massive collapse right then.
Why not?
Because the breakdown, when it comes from unprocessed trauma surfacing, might be expected to be, perhaps less immediately tied to that specific trigger. Or maybe it builds more gradually before erupting, or happens later when defenses are lower. The filler's timing feels a bit more like a direct reaction to Naruto, rather than the trauma itself finally breaking through after weeks of suppression.
So the filler's version fine for weeks, then snaps seemingly just because of Naruto feels less like that deep, unprocessed trauma pattern.
That's the argument from this psychological perspective, yeah. The manga's portrayal isolation, internal buildup, then eruption, seems to track more closely with how that deep trauma can work. Silently building, then exploding. It's not always neat or linear.
Right. And conversely, the filler, it gives us clearer external reasons, maybe, like it spells out, he's jealous of Naruto.
It does. It makes the motivation perhaps easier to grasp on the surface.
But it doesn't align as well with the typical, often messier trajectory of trauma responses?
That seems to be the case. Delayed reactions are common, yes, but that prolonged period of seeming totally functional, then snapping specifically at the rival's progress, it leans away from the internal trauma spiral idea.
And it supports the manga's idea that trauma can just build up inside and erupt without needing a brand new, huge external reason right at that moment.
Exactly. That internal pressure is reason enough, psychologically speaking, which lends more weight to the manga's depiction viewed through this particular lens.
Okay, so psychologically, the manga seems to have a stronger footing in, like, trauma theory.
It appears so, based on these interpretations.
But we have to remember, storytelling isn't just about psychological accuracy, is it? It's subjective.
Absolutely not. It's art, it's emotion. Different viewers connect with different things for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, maybe the filler does land better for some people because those external motivations are clearer. Maybe that feels more satisfying dramatically for them.
Entirely possible. Emotional impact is personal. What resonates is what resonates.
Right, so our goal here isn't to say, you're wrong if you prefer the filler.
Not at all. It's more about understanding the choices the writers made, manga versus filler, and seeing how those choices align or don't align with what we understand about psychology, specifically trauma.
Understanding the why behind each version's approach to his internal state.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Seeing it through that trauma-informed lens gives us one way to analyze those choices.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways?
Well, it seems the manga's version of Sasuke's breakdown, coming after isolation, feeling more sudden, more intense, aligns more closely with patterns we see in trauma responses.
Right, the delayed reaction, the impact of being alone, small triggers, unleashing big emotions rooted in that past event.
And the filler, while maybe giving more explicit external reasons, kind of deviates from that typical trauma path by showing him seemingly fine for weeks before the outburst.
Okay. So for you listening, maybe next time you're watching or reading something and a character is going through it, especially involving trauma,
Yeah.
think about these ideas. How does the portrayal resonate? Does it feel true to the messy reality of the human psyche, or does it feel simplified?
It's interesting to consider how different stories handle that.
Definitely. Which brings us to a final thought, maybe a bit provocative.
Okay.
How much should a story prioritize strict psychological realism versus providing really clear, easy-to-understand motivations for its characters?
Ah, that's the eternal balancing act, isn't it? Realism versus narrative clarity or maybe dramatic effect.
Yeah. Where's that sweet spot? Something to think about.